All right, let's start the session on Amazon Elastic Container Service. In short, we call it as ECS. In this particular session, we will understand some basic concepts of Elastic Container Service and we will do one hands-on exercise. Let us understand more about ECS. Now, as I told you, ECS stands for Elastic Container Service. Now, it is a fully managed container orchestration service that will help us to easily deploy, manage, and scale containerized applications. That means one of the solution on AWS, if you want to deploy containerized solutions, that is called as ECS. As I told you, ECS stands for Elastic Container Service. Now, if you choose to deploy a containerized application, if you do that with ECS, it is very easy for us to deploy. We will see in our hands-on exercise how easy it is, and it is also easy to manage. And if you want to scale up or scale down the applications, also it is very easy with ECS. So ECS is a fully managed container orchestration service. Now, if you want to understand ECS completely, there are three major components that we need to understand. One is called as capacity, second is called as controller, third is called as provisioning. These are the three components, major components that are there in ECS. Now, let us understand each one of them. Let us understand, first of all, what is a capacity. Now, let's say we are creating a container. Now, if you're creating a container, that container requires some infrastructure, right? When we create a container, that container requires some infrastructure. Now, where that infrastructure is provided is nothing but a capacity. Now, there are three ways how you can provide a infrastructure to the containers that you're going to launch. One of the option is that we can create EC2 instances and we can launch the containers on the EC2 instances. Now, when we are choosing this EC2 instance, or when we decided that our container has to be created on an EC2 instance, so when we are creating this EC2 instance, we can select the instance type, we can select the number of instances, and we can manage the capacity. This is one option in the capacity where we can choose the what is the infrastructure and where it has to be hosted. Now the second option is called as AWS Fargate. Okay, the second option is called as AWS Fargate. Now what is AWS Fargate? If I want to launch a container and if I don't want to create EC2 instances, we can use the option called as Fargate. You can simply refer the Fargate service as a serverless service. Okay, so that means you don't need to create any EC2 instances as in the first option. All that you need to do is that you can create a container and Fargate will launch the container for you in a serverless manner. So it is like a pay as you go compute engine. You with Fargate, you no need to create EC2 instance, you no need to create manage servers, all those things. Okay, that is the second option. So if you want to create containers or if you want to launch containers on ECS service, one of the capacity you can choose by creating EC2 instances. Second is by Fargate, which is serverless. And the third one, we can call it as on-prem. Okay, what does that mean? That means, let's say I'm managing my own data center. I have my own servers on premises, but I still want to use ECS. Can we use that? Yes, we can still use that. So, with the help of ECS, we can launch the containers on the servers which is there on our premises. So, these are the three capacity options that we have. Okay, so basically capacity defines the infrastructure where your containers can run. So the infrastructure could be EC2 instances, or it is Fargate, which is serverless, or the last option is on-prem. These are the three different options that we have for capacity. Now, what is the other major component? The other major component is called as controller. We can simply say the controller simply as scheduler. Now, what does this schedules? This scheduler, we can say it is a software that manage your applications. Okay, it is a controller is simply a scheduler, or you can say it is an Amazon ECS scheduler that is the software that manages all your applications that you're launching with the help of ECS. Okay, so this is, you can say, controller, simply it is a scheduler. So the first one is capacity, it defines the infrastructure. The second one is controller, which schedules your application. Now, what is the third one? The third one is called as provisioning. Now we know the first option is what? How, where we can create the EC2 instances. Second one is it basically schedules the containers. Now, how we can create the schedules, or how we can create these containers? Multiple options are there. One of the option is called as AWS Management Console, which is a AWS UI. We can log into AWS Management Console and we can start creating the or using the ECS service. Now the second option is that AWS CLI. By using AWS CLI also, we can provision EC2 instances or SDKs or CDK. Now we also have an option called as Copilot. With the help of Copilot also, we can launch containers. So that means there are four options how we can provision the containers. One is called as AWS Management Console. Second one is AWS CLI. SDK, which stands for Software Development Kit, or Copilot. Basically, Copilot is an open source tool for developers to build, release, and operate production ready containerized applications on ECS. CDK, it is also an open source software development framework that you can use to model and provision your cloud application resources by using familiar languages. That is what is CDK. Okay, so now we have three major components. One is called as capacity, second one is called as controller, third one is called as provisioning. Capacity determines where your containers has to be launched. We have three options for that. One is EC2, second one is Fargate, which is a serverless, third one is on-premises compute. Controller is ECS scheduler. Next one is provisioning. How we can provision by using AWS CLI, SDK, CDK, or management console. All right. Now we can see all of them in one slide. So provisioning, we can do the provisioning with the help of AWS CLI, Copilot, management console, or a CDK or a SDK. Now controller is Amazon ECS. It is the software to manage all the applications. And the capacity options, we can have the capacity options on Amazon EC2, AWS Fargate, or on-premises compute. Okay, now let us look into the life cycle of a container, how a container operates. Now basically, if you see, if I have to launch a container, how can we launch a container? With the help of a image. A container can be launched with the help of a image. Now, what is an image? We can simply say a image, it includes the code of the application, the runtime of the application, system tools and system libraries that an application required to run. Okay, all those are put together as a container, and that container is created from a image, and the image is a read only template. Okay, now you can say image is a read only template, but what that has: the application code, runtime, system libraries, and system tools for an application to run. Now, with the help of this container image, we create something called as a task definition. Okay, with the help of a container image, we create something called as a task definition. Now, from the task definition, we can either launch a task or we can launch a service. Okay, from the task definition, we can either launch a task or a service. We can either launch a task or a service from a task definition. Now let us understand the difference between a task or a service. What is a task? Now, if you guys are aware a Docker or Kubernetes, okay, a task we can simply compare or consider it as a container. Okay, a task is nothing but a container. On ECS terms, we say that launch a task, that means create a container. In Kubernetes, we call something called as a pod. Launching a task is like creating a pod on a Kubernetes service. So if you want to launch a container, you call it as a launch a task on ECS. Then what is a service? If you want to launch, let's say you created a task, that means a container is running. Now let's say the task is crashed. Now we want another instance of tasks to be up and running, right? If we want to do that, we can create something called as a service where it will take care of provisioning required number of tasks. Now in Kubernetes, if you guys aware something called as a replica set. Now service is something similar to a replica set on Kubernetes. Okay, so the life cycle is, first of all, we can create containers from a task definition. Now a task definition is created from a image. Now how a image is created? Typically an image is created from a Docker file. Typically an image is created from a Docker file. So with the help of image, we create task definitions. With the help of task definitions, either launch a task or a service. Now if you launch a task or a service, where this will be launched? On the capacity, either on EC2 instance or on premises compute or AWS Fargate. Okay, so this is the life cycle of ECS. Now let us look into the some terms, general terms that is used. One of the term that we already discussed is called as image. Now what is the image? So images are created from a read-only templates. Sorry, containers are created from a read-only templates that is called as a image. Now images are typically built from a Docker file. A Docker file is a plain text that specifies all of the components that are included in a container. Now what is a task definition? A task definition is a blueprint of your application. It is a text file in JSON format that describes the parameters and one or more containers that form your application. Now what is a task? A task is a nothing but you can call it as a container. What is a cluster? Where your tasks are running, logical grouping of tasks or services that runs on the infrastructure capacity that is registered to a cluster. All right, these are the different terminologies which is there on ECS. Now let us do one thing. Let us do one hands-on exercise and let me tell you the steps that are involved to do the hands-on exercise. Step 1, we will create a Ubuntu EC2 instance. Okay, and then we will install Docker on it. Okay, once we install Docker, we will create couple of files. One is we will create a Docker file. Second one is we'll create a application code file. Okay, this basically will be given by your developers. I have a HTML file, we will use the same file. Okay, and then we will build an image, and create a repository on AWS. Push the image to ECR, that is the repository that we are going to create here, and then create a task definition. After creating a task definition, we will create a task or a service, and then we will see our application is up. Okay, these are the couple of steps that we are going to do to make sure that our container is up and running on AWS ECS service. Okay, first of all, let me log into my AWS console. I'm on my AWS console. Let me sign into that. Okay, let me go to a service called as EC2. Go to instances here, select launch instance. Let me give a name of my instance as EC2 demo. I will choose the image as Ubuntu, and I will choose the key pair as the key pair which I already have, and then I will choose an existing security group. Okay, I don't have one. I will create this in a different region. Okay, let's say North Virginia. Okay, let me give the name ECS demo. Okay, let me choose Ubuntu. Let me choose the key pair as Docker demo, and I will choose a security group which is already existing. Okay, I have opened all the ports for that, and then select option launch instance. Now this would take a minute for the instance to be launched. Okay, we see that it is successfully launched. Let me go there. You see this is in pending state, ECS demo. Let us wait for a minute here. You see now it is running in state. Select option connect. Connect. Okay, the server is opening in a web browser. Let us give it a moment here. Okay, now I'm able to connect to the server. Let me log in as a root user, sudo su. Okay, let me log into the root folder. Now I am in the root folder. Let me update the packages, sudo apt update all the Ubuntu packages. So as per our Once we update that as per our steps, we need to install Docker. Sudo apt install docker.io. Okay, the Docker would be installed with this simple command. Now, I also have couple of code files in my Docker Hub. Let me also show that. Let me go to Docker, sorry, not on Docker Hub, GitHub. Let me go to GitHub. I have a repository by name Docker. Okay, let me go to exercise 2. I will use this Docker file, index.html file. Okay, now this Docker is installed. We can see that Docker dot hyphen hyphen version. You see Docker version is 20.10. All right, now let me create a folder here. Mkdir folder name, I want to give it as ECS. Folder is created. Let me change directly to the folder which I created, ECS. Now I'm in this folder called as ECS. Okay, now here, first of all, let me copy my code files. Okay, I have this index.html file. Let me copy this. Copy, go here, create file, vi index.html, enter, I paste, escape. Okay, my index.html is created. Okay, now let me create one more file, that is nothing but a Docker file. Okay, because I want to build an image. Docker file is what I want to create, and enter. Now I want to use the same syntax which I already have, so that it would be easy for you guys also. When you practice, you can see this, you can use the same commands. Okay, so this is basically, I'm using a Ubuntu. I'm running update install Apache and copying the index.html file from my local to container, exposing port 82, and I want to run these commands. That is what is there in this particular file. All right, escape. So I have created two files here. One is index.html, second one is a Docker file. Okay, now let us wait a minute here and let's create a repository first, because now if we do a build, a Docker image will be created. Okay, now before I create a Docker image, I want to create a repository on AWS, so that we can push the image that we create on this server to AWS. Okay, now how to do that? Let me go to this AWS console, select something called as ECR. Okay, ECR, go to Elastic Container Registry. Select option get started. Okay, now you can create a repository which is either public or private. Now in this case, I want to make my repository as public. So I'm selecting the option called as public. Now what should be the name of your repository? So it is showing public.ecr.aws and it is giving a unique name. After that, we can select our repository name. Let's say I want to give my repository name as level up. Now if you want to upload some repository logo, etc., you can do that. Okay, I don't want to do that as of now. Everything else I want to leave it as defaults and select option create repository. Now you see, it is very simple. A repository is created. We can click on this repository. Now if you see this, this option will come as view push commands. Now it will show us all the commands that is there. Okay, now whatever in this particular server we are creating image, I need to push to AWS, right? So to push to AWS, first of all, we have to install AWS CLI on this server. Okay. Now let's see how to install AWS CLI. It is very simple. AWS CLI for Ubuntu. Enter. Now we'll get, we need to just run two commands and CLI will be installed. Now if you go here, you see there is option called as Linux. Okay, now run this, copy this syntax, go to the server because we need to push the image to AWS AWS registry. Then we need to have AWS CLI on this particular server. Paste. Okay, and then uh, let me remove these two commands because I don't have unzip. So once we curl this URL, okay, this URL is curled. Now sudo apt install unzip. This is a utility that we need to install. Okay, I have installed this. Now copy that commands again, paste. Now we have unzip now, so we can unzip that. So for that, oh, let me run this again. That's okay. So it is unzipping the file and it is installing AWS CLI. Okay, this is going to just take another 15 seconds of time. Okay, this is uninstalling all the AWS CLI package. Then we can run AWS CLI commands also from this particular server. Okay, it's going to take another 5 seconds to 10 seconds. Okay, now you see here it is saying that you can run AWS hyphen hyphen version to see what version of AWS is there. Okay, you see AWS CLI version 2.1. All right. Now for this server to communicate with AWS, we need to give some credentials. Okay. Now for the credentials, let me open this in another window. Sign into console. Okay, let me go to my IAM. Go to IAM. Users. I have a lot of users here. If you don't have users, create one user. Okay, let me take the user here. So this user has administrator access. Let me go to this option called as security credentials. Under this, you see there's something called as access keys. Create this option called as create access key and the command line interface. I understand and select option next. Create access key. Okay, now you see I got access key and secret access key. Let me go to the server. Select option called as AWS configure. Enter. Now it is asking for a access key ID. Select access key. Give the key here and enter. Now it is asking secret access key. Select this, copy and then paste it here. Enter. Default region, default output, rest all default. Now I'm able to log into this particular server with the CLI to AWS console. Now if you see AWS S3 LS, there are no buckets. So if there are any buckets, I'll be able to see here only. Now let's say AWS S3 MB, that means make bucket, my demo for ECS today. I'm giving some unique name. Enter. So basically it has created a bucket for me. Now let's see AWS S3 LS. Now it is showing there is one particular bucket in this particular AWS account. Okay, that means I'm able to access AWS from this particular server. Now let's come back here. Now you see there are some commands. That means if I want to log into the repository from this server, I need to use this command. So this is AWS ECR public login region Docker login username password. Okay, and the repository name. You see this public.ecr. This is the repository name. Let me copy this syntax. Go here and paste. Enter. Now you see it is saying that a login is succeeded. Now let's say here, let us see Docker images. Now there are no images here. Okay, but we have Docker file and index.html. So what I want to do, I want to create an image. Okay, so let me go here. We also have a syntax for that. You see there's a syntax docker build -t level up dot. Okay, let me explain you that syntax. So basically what this will do, this will build an image. What is the name of the image? The name of the image will be level up. And where it will take the files? It will take the local files which are there here. So basically this AWS, all these files, it will read those files. Okay, out of that it will search for this Docker file, because it is when it has to do a build, it will look for Docker file, and whatever configuration is there in the Docker file, it will build an image with that particular Docker file. Okay, let me enter. You see it is saying that sending build context to Docker daemon. So it is basically building a image. You see it is pulling from Ubuntu and then pull complete. Okay, it is running the syntaxes that we have given. It is running apt install. Okay, all the things that we have mentioned there, it is copying those things. Okay, it is done. Okay, it is exposing the port, it is copying the index.html file. So it has basically created a image. Okay, the image successfully tagged as level up, say colon latest. Okay, now the next syntax, what is that? After a build is completed, tag your image so you can push the image to a repository. So this is very mandatory. If you don't tag the images, you will not be able to push. Okay, let me select this and then tag this, paste, enter. So the image is tagged. Now let us run this command docker images. Now you can see there are multiple images here. Previously there is no image. Now Ubuntu level up, these are the images which are there. Now finally we want to push the image that we created on this server to the ECR. Okay, that is a repository on AWS. Select this docker push and the repository name and the image name. Let me go here, paste and enter. Now you see the image is being pushed. It is saying the image is pushed. The other contents are getting pushed. Now after this is done, we can see an image in the ECR registry with the name level up. So the image is pushed. Now if I go here, let's select this option close. Okay, now there are no images, right? Let me refresh this. Now you see there is an image by name level up and the image tag is latest. Okay, that is how we push the image from a server to the ECR registry. Now with this image, we have to create a container. So let me go to ECS, go to Elastic Container Service, select option get started. Okay, first of all, let us create one cluster. Select this option called as create cluster. Give a name to the cluster. My demo for ECS. Okay, rest all things I will leave it as defaults. And select this option called as create. You see, by default, it has selected a serverless option. If we want to change, we can change that. You see, cluster my demo is in progress. My demo for ECS is creating, that is in progress. This would take about another 5 seconds. Now, if you see, my cluster has been created successfully. Now, the second thing what we need to do is that we have to create a task definition. Okay. Now, but if you go into the cluster, you see there are a couple of things: service, tasks. Okay. If I have to create a task or run a task, first of all, we have to create a task definition. Okay, now let's go here, create a new task definition. There are two ways to that. If we already have a JSON file for the task definition, we can select create a new task definition with JSON. As of now, we don't have. Select this option called as create a new task definition. Okay, and then it will ask for a name. I'll say demo ECS is my task name, and we can give a name of our container. Let's say the name I'm giving it as level up. Now here we should give the name of the repository. Let me go here to check the name of the repository. ECR Elastic Container Registry. Okay, get started. This is our repository name. You see this URI. This is what we need to copy. Copy this URI. Go back here and give the repository URL. Port 80, I want to do the port mapping. 80 is fine. If you want to map any other port, you can select add more port mappings. Rest all I will leave it as defaults. Okay, select option next. Okay, now if you want to add any other environment, so basically where you want to capacity we discussed, right? It is either Fargate, which is serverless, or EC2 instances, or on premises. We can choose one option, and one CPU, all this is fine. Okay, execution role, ECS task execution role, that is fine. Rest all I will leave it as defaults and select option next. So with all these details, it will generate one JSON file. So this is the summary of all the details that we have selected. I am selecting option called as create. So now this has basically created a task definition. The task definition is called as a demo ECS. Okay. Now if you see here, deploy, we can either create a service or either run a task. If you see here actions, you can deregister. Okay. Or if I want to create a new revision, we can create a new revision with out JSON or with JSON. Now we can directly deploy from here. That means, so run a task means what? Basically run a container from this task definition. Or else we can also go back to cluster. Okay, go to cluster. In this, you see there's something called as tasks here. We can select this option, run a new task. And I have to select what is the task definition here. If we come here, we can see our all the task definitions that we have. The task definition I have given is demo ECS. Select that. The revision is first one. Number of tasks is 1. So if you select number of tasks 2, 2 containers will create automatically. Okay, but 1 is enough for me. Rest all I will leave it as defaults and select option create. Now you see task definition successfully created. Task is also launched within milliseconds. The task is launched. You see the latest status provisioning. Okay, let me click on this task. Okay, now you see this task has a public IP address. Now basically if I put this public IP address in a browser, it should open my website. Let me put that there and let me run it. You see now, this is my website which I have hosted in that HTML code file. That means I am able to successfully launch this application from ECS containers. Okay, by using ECS service, I am able to launch my ECS containers on ECS service. Okay, so what I have done, okay, let me summarize that. First of all, I created something called as okay, couple of things I did. I created a ECR registry. Okay, even before ECR registry, I created one EC2 instance, installed Docker on that, installed AWS CLI. Okay, and built a Docker image, and then created a ECR on AWS, that is a repository on AWS, and pushed the image to ECR, and then created a ECS cluster, defined a task definition, and then ran a task. So running a task, that means it's simply running a container. These are the multiple steps that we have configured to create and run containers on ECS. All right. Now let us deep dive into the next hands-on exercise.